Obviously, when a situation like this unfolds, it requires a lot of people to respond. There has been some criticism, however, on the communication response from Via Rail specifically. Let's talk a little bit more about that part of the story now. Joining us here in studio, Bob Pickard, Managing Partner at National Public Relations. Bob, nice to see you.
Good morning, John.
In your daily job, it's about springing into action when something is happening. And as we've seen on social media, with a story like this, which affects so many Canadians, people are very quick to express their frustration. With Via Rail's response specifically, what's been your reaction to what they've had to say or not say?
I think more to the latter point of your comment there, they have not had enough to say under these circumstances. This is a big issue. This is a big, pervasive, system-wide issue that affects many thousands of Canadians. It affects the whole constellation of Via Rail stakeholder community. So the CEO of Via Rail should come out and communicate her point of view with respect to what's going on and to tune into the right emotional wavelength of what's happening right now on this matter. That way, people will know what to expect, what Via Rail thinks about what's going on, and will reassure them that things will be back on track, so to speak, in the future.
So we haven't heard enough, essentially, is what you're saying.
There's been kind of an information vacuum. The CEO of CN has come out and communicated on this issue, but so far, Ms. Garneau, Cynthia Garneau, the CEO of Via Rail, she has not yet directly communicated. So I think this is something that people could look forward to now. It's a really tough situation for Via. I kind of empathize with their situation because they aren't in control of the blockades.
Right.
They aren't in control of the tracks. CN's got the infrastructure. And so even in the best of times, Via and people who take the train realize that it's the CN freight trains that have the priority on those tracks. Via is not calling the shots over the use of that infrastructure. CN does. So it's hard for Via to sort of take responsibility. We've talked about this before. CEO saying, we take responsibility. But for Via, that's hard because they aren't in charge of this infrastructure.
What if there's some concern on their part about communicating too much that they don't necessarily know? I mean, you just mentioned if CN traffic gets some priority and they start trying to say something about when things might get back on schedule, not necessarily knowing, could that be a risk for them? Maybe is that why they've been a little on the cautious side, if you will?
Well, Via has been on the cautious side, but I think they also have bandwidth and resourcing issues with respect to their corporate communication. I think Via has made the best of what they have traditionally. They're a pretty good social media communicator usually when it comes to responding to people and their delays on trains or customer service issues. But in this case, it's so pervasive, so many people are involved, so many trains, so many trip plans. I think that basically they've been overwhelmed by the volume of what's happening now. And interestingly, John, I noticed that Via Rail appointed its very first chief communications officer just a few weeks ago in January. So I think they're heading in the right direction when it comes to communicating with people. But this fellow who just took that job surely is encountering a baptism by fire.
What's the reputational risk? You highlighted the fact that this is something that in some ways is not in their control, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the way people feel about the brand doesn't change as a result of how they navigate through the situation. I mean, what does history tell us about that?
I think they need, at the beginning of this kind of an incident, to just establish the presence of the leader in the communication stream through social media. CEO Cynthia Garneau, she does have a Twitter account, although she hasn't tweeted since she took office last year. She has a platform. Her predecessor was a social CEO as well on Twitter, with which she can communicate with Canadians so that as this kind of thing evolves, the company can just explain what's happening, what they know, what they can do about it, and what they can't do about it. It's okay for a company to say they don't know what's going to happen. It's okay for a company to say there's some uncertainty, as long as they're straight in the real time now of what's going on. People are so impatient. They just have to know what's happening now. And that's what corporate communications is all about.
What's been your general takeaway, broadly speaking, on this story? I mean, obviously at the center of it comes some of the key issues we constantly talk about. the future direction of this nation,
Right.
our philosophy when it comes to issues like the environment.
Right.
I mean, while this is a protest surrounding one particular project, in many ways it's a protest around the bigger pipeline issue. And earlier in the program, we were highlighting some of the responses from CEOs across the country.
Sure.
So what's been your take on how important this has been as a sort of a conversation piece around what is often a very heated issue these days?
This is a moment of truth for the Via Rail brand. And the Via Rail brand might well take a stand on this issue. But if they were to do so, let's just imagine they did for a moment. If the CEO were to communicate a policy stance on what's happening here with these blockades, obviously that's going to be a politically divisive thing, which could alienate part of their consumer constituency. But they have to have something to say. Right now, there's this information vacuum which is being filled by critics or by people who don't know what the future holds. This is a brand-defining moment for Via. It's a moment of truth for them, and they need to rise to this challenge and start communicating fluently, continuously, sincerely.
Okay, Bob, thanks for your insights on this developing story. Appreciate it as always. Bob Pickard, managing partner at National Public Relations, and on our website.